We're discussing Rav Shimon Shazuri, the two things that the halacha is like him. So we're up to the following case over here. The next case is the case of the wine. The Flamed Aleph in Menachos were about 6 lines from the top of the page. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said, when we say the halacha like Rav Shimon Shazuri, ayayin, it's talking about the case of the wine. What's the case of the wine? The Tnan, we learned, the din is that we learned many times in the laws of Tumah, basically, except, we had Tumah's Midrash was an exception, but basically each level, each strata is a step lower. And there's, there are certain levels, strata, by Chulin goes through a Sheni, and by Truma Shlishi, by Kodesh goes up to Revi. And then within these cases, we said there's a difference between Kalim can only become tummy from an Avatuma, or a person can only become a tummy Avatuma. Oichin and mashkin can become tummy, not only a rishon, but also a sheni. So food touches food, becomes tummy as well. Now, we have a special rule that mashkin, that if something comes in contact with liquid, it becomes a rishon. It's exerim midrabana that mashkin becomes a tchila, becomes a rishon. Exerim because sometimes the saliva of a zov or a zava, are a much higher degree of tumah. So the question is, what's the definition of mashkin? Mashkin is water. What about other liquids? So for some things we say that's 7 different mashkins. What about other liquids? So here we have an argument. Rav Nachman, it's 7 lines on top of the page. Rav Nachman is going, we're talking about the case of wine. Oil is always considered a liquid, and it's always, I don't care how the oil became tamei. If an av hatuma touched oil, a person who touched a dead body, or it came in contact with a rishon hatuma, or even if it came in contact with a sheni, which is l'chayr at the end of the line, but if it touches mashkin, the mashkin becomes a tchila. We had a machlekes in the end of the first page of Pesachim, whether it applies in the base of Midrash as well. Rav and Shmuel, with dochen, Torah or not. So he says wine, oil is included. Chacham say afat vash, honey is also included. Rav Shimon Shazuri, but afayayin also wine. Now it sounds like that others don't agree with wine, and Rav Shimon Shazuri is adding wine. Meklal tanakamas of yayin loy. How can that be? Everyone holds that wine is considered liquid. None of us. Rav Shimon Shazuri yayin. In other words, everyone holds that oil. So everyone holds that oil is liquid, and that. And that wine is liquid, and wine is liquid, and so on. Everyone knows that wine is liquid. So what do you mean afayayin? As if he's adding something. So he meant only wine. You say oil. You say honey. I say only wine is a liquid, not the others. And the halacha is like Rav Shimon Shazuri. Now, Taisa says we find in many places that oil is considered a liquid. Remember, they have zayin mashkin. Yeah. Well, and the halacha of Shimon Shazuri. Yeah, and exactly. So he says we're talking about over here not stam oil or wine. We're talking about here that's thick, very thick, and like sort of dried, congealed. And that's where there's a machlekes. And Shimon Shazuri says oil is not only wine. If it's congealed, it's considered a liquid. But stam, if it's flowing, everyone agrees that they're all liquids: honey, wine, oil. Now we're talking about Shimon Shazuri, so we have another few cases of Shimon Shazuri. Shimon Shazuri said, now, as long as you don't give your meiser and truma from something, that true is called tevel. Tov loy, it's no good, you cannot eat it. We also learned before that if you buy from a nama oretz, truma will assume they gave. Meiser, even though the majority do give, but not everyone gives. So Chacham made a example called demai. Domai, what's the story? And therefore you have to give your own meiser as well. So we discussed it yesterday as well. So what happened was that it happened once that my tevel got mixed up with my chulin. I had normal grains, for example, that I already gave all the trumas and the mice and everything was done properly. But then I had tevel, another stack that nothing was done, and they all got mixed up. Uvasi, and I went with Sha'alti Rav Tarfon. I went out of Tarfon. What should I do? I can give, if I want to be machman and give truma from this mixture or meiser in the mixture, the problem is part of it is already exempt. Part of it is chulin, and the chulin already was given the truma meiser, so they are potter. And if I'm going to give truma meiser, I'm giving from potter on chiyuv. So how am I going to overcome this problem? What do I do? Normally, this is the advice that he gave me. He said to me, he says that even though, what do you call it? So he said to me, go in the marketplace The aser alav. He says, go to the marketplace and buy some more tavua from Amorit. So don't use this pile here, because this pile you might be picking up chulin. So go to and even though Mahatoida, what do you call it? What do you call it? Even though Mahatoida, the tevel is not a problem. So Menachos, there's no problem. Everything's the same. But because of the Rabbanon, the tevel is chayiv in giving meiser, and you have chulim, you have a problem. It looks like minapoter alachiv. So he says, go to the marketplace and buy more from Amoritz and use that to give true meiser, and that is chayiv Rabbanon, so they're equals. You're giving from chiv midrabanan to chiv midrabanan, and you add more. You know how much you had here. You had to give a certain amount of bushels, let's say, to meiser. Yes, in category, and you know how much you have to give from this pile here, but you can't give any because you don't know what you're giving. So you give from this pile here, but it takes a few extra. For that pile it needs its own, and then take an extra 10 bushels for this pile. That's how you get over the problem. No problem, and they're both equal level. So kach l'chamesh will go in the marketplace and buy from Namaris. I say to love and give meiser on this as well. Kesavak, he holds midiraisa bruba bottle. He holds mahatoida. Even if you hold as tevel midiraisa mahatoida, everything is bottle. It's only with rabbanon that you have to give meiser. So even on the tevel here, which is chayiv l'chaydim and hatoida, because what do we solve here? You're going to buy for Nama Oretz, but you have here tevel, and tevel might be a chayiv matoida, but it's not chayiv matoida because this tevel here is mixed up with chulin, and the majority is chulin. So therefore, mehatoida there's no chiv. It's only midrabanan. So now they're all the same level of chiv. So he holds generally the raisa that the raisa bottle beroiv. Generally, but the raisa is bottle beroiv, and the truth is, you don't need that because we just explained. We're not talking about tevel deraisa. We're talking about the mai. This is another girs in the Gemara. So our girs in the Gemara does not have the words deraisa but beroiv because we're talking about tevel derabbanan. So you don't need to add this extra point. But even if you hold tevel deraisa, it still will be good because you brought it down to a level of derabbanan. And the main point is beroiv amar is masamein. In the Roiv are giving meiser. It's only a chumrah that we're saying give meiser. So now what you're doing is what you have next door, and over here you're taking my potter all the same level. Says the Gemara, have another solution. Why didn't he give the other solution? That is, buy from a guy. A guy, if you buy from a guy, it's potter. So I mean that the chayiv that we know you think that you won't give meiser of your own, and that's it. Now we had in Gemara Kedushin in other places a machlekes if a goy buys property at Yisrael, is he chayiv and is that tfuah? Not the goy is chayiv personally, but is the tfuah chayiv and meiser or not? So we say we right now we're thinking if the goy really is potter from meiser and mahatoyda. It's only with rabbanon that the chayiv meiser. Again, you brought it down to the same level. All with the rabbanans. So we're going to buy from a goy as well. Give him two options. The sovereign must be because he holds no, you're chayv ma'atoida. If you buy from a goy, you're chayv ma'atoida is hell garnished. And you're going to take extra over there, and you're going to have in mind, to give us meiser and truma. You're going to have in mind the demai. You can't do that because that's menachiv ala potter. You can't do that either. That's one thing. Taisus asks an interesting question here, and he said, the din is if you buy from a yid, if you're a lakeach, you're potter from giving meiser, only midrabanan. So if you buy from a guy, the same thing. So how can this eitzah work? Buy from a guy. Let's say the guy is chayiv meiser hatoyda. In kinyan la'akum lahafkia. Let's say it's chayiv hatoyda, but you bought it. You're a lakeach, and lakeach is potter hatoyda midrabanan. So the big machlekes shainim, whichever way you go, you'll answer this other way around. The machlekes is, when do we say you potter? Dafke if you bought it after the goy already did meruach, smoothed it out, it's all ripe. So therefore the chiv happened by the goy and you just bought it afterwards, so you potter. So therefore we're going to be talking about a case where you bought it before the meruach. Other certain pass all the way around. Dafke if you bought it before meruach, they say you potter. But if you bought it already after it's ready and now it's in the shus of yid chayiv, so then we'll say that it's talking about a case over here you bought it, before you bought it after meruach. So whatever you chayim matoida, we're going to learn that this is talking about a case. Whatever you chayim, whichever way we say that a buyer is only chayim rabbanon, we're going to say it's talking about a case over here where you're chayim matoida. You bought it either after the meruach, you bought it before the meruach, so therefore you're chayim matoida. So anyway, that's why we don't give that solution. Others learn punktverkehrt. He said the advice he gave him was buy from a guy because he holds only with the rabbanon because the guy is not the guy owns the tour. He's no longer chai matayda. So he's king. He will come. He's all. I've given me the meiser. But have them in a potter. He's potter. And therefore, that's what you know how you bring in the same level. Give the other advice. Buy from another mother. So he holds ein Amher Oris Ma'asrim. Interesting because we always learned the Rav Armas Masin, but we hadn't started paying a Shabbos there Machlekes beginning. He holds that the Rav Amaratz Masin. In other words, it's a real suffix. It's a suffix Mahatoida. Suffix Mahatoida is much higher than only a Chiv Rabbanon, and therefore you couldn't use the Chiv Rabbanon to use that for Tremaisa to use something which is a suffix Mahatoida. Especially if you learn not like the Rambam, like the Raj, but that a suffix Mahatoida L'chumra. But even if you learn with the Rabbanon L'chumra, it's a much higher level the Rabbanon than the Rabbanon. Let's say about you're buying from Namoritz or the other Rabbanons. Or buying from a guy. Shalach Rabbi Basham Papa Hodam Rabbi Mechina Amarula. So Rabbi Yema Basham said Papa said Papa. This Rabbi Mechina said Nemula Mechina Halacha Shizudi. He said Halacha like Abshim Shizudi. Will oid al kol markish on Shizudi. Kamai before yesterday we learned that Halacha is always like Abshim Shizudi. Did he also mean Atman is out of the Tevchol? Even this case here with the Tevchol Gamis of the Cholin. Amalain, yeah, everywhere. Omar Ravashi, Omar Mazuta once said to me, I don't understand this question in the first place. What was his question? Of course, the halacha of Shimshuzuri. Mika Amma ben Mishnah Seinu, did he say I'm limiting the halacha of Shimshuzuri only in our Mishnah? Kol Mokum Shoshana Kama. He said clearly, wherever Rav Shimshuzuri ventures an opinion, the halacha is like him. So what are you asking over here? I don't understand what he's saying here because it's not Rav Shimshuzuri, it's Rav Tarfon. Rav Shimshuzuri said, this is what happened. I asked Rav Tarfon what to do, and this is what he told me to do. Why does even Bechal fall under the category of the halachas like Rav Shimon Shizuri? Is it because he's agreeing with Rav Tarfon and therefore it comes like his dinner because he agreed with him? Anyway, going back to the dinim of Sefer Torah and mezuzah and all that, I'm going to lead into mezuzah. If you have a rip in your parchment, in the parchment that goes through two lines, Yitfar, you can still mend it. You go ahead and sew it. But the shalish, if the three lines already al Yitfar, then it's very apparent and it doesn't look. It's not double no. It's not befitting for a Sefer Torah. And what do? You remove that whole piece, that whole yidiyah, and you rewrite that whole section. Said to Rav Ashi, interesting, he called Rabbi Zutzer because I guess compared to the big Rabbi. For when do we say that three lines, it doesn't look right, only if it's an old cloth? If it's a brand new one, then less labah, doesn't look so bad. An old one, you'll have, its age, its color, it's very tarnished, it looks blackish, and then you have this new thread going through it, it becomes very apparent. But if it's brand new and it's white and everything else, and the thread doesn't really look so bad. When we say old, atika mamirum mamish old. No, what do you mean? If you didn't put gold nuts there, if you put gold nuts there, then it gets dark. And so then it's much more apparent, the new strings you put in there. But if you didn't put gold nuts, I don't care how the age of it, if you didn't put gold nuts, then it doesn't look so dark, and then it's all right. When we're talking about here that you can sew it up only with a sinus, which is what we use for the Taisha Aval begrodin threads loy. No. And no. Some of the Rishonim actually say that we don't use either one, we use other kinds of very thin threads, so very like silk and all that.
To show you like the RD is a weaver.
Could very well be. Could be. Yeah, could be. Why Rabbi said, okay, you just told me that if it's three lines. Pasni, you don't sew it up. What about bein daf ledaf? It's three lines, but it's between it's in the margin, between the columns. Or bein shita l'shita. Within the column, but it's between the lines. But it's horizontal rather than vertical or diagonally. It's horizontal. What happens then? So different doesn't look. Since none of the letters are actually ripped. Now, when we say here, by the way, it's tore, we must be talking about that it ripped between the letters, not the actual letters ripped. It's a whole different story. So we're asking if it's horizontal or between the margin. It's the margins is not so bad. Is not so bad. I remember one of my rabbeim once said, "Why is it that you open up any sefer, there's all these margins? Isn't that a waste? Baltashkas? Can you imagine if the sefer was? Remember, I don't know if you remember, you wouldn't remember, but we used to type in a typewriter. A typewriter was no margins. It went to the top, and like double the words that you have.
Look at the Sifas Kodesh, the old ones, the typeset.
Yeah, the typeset ones, like they took up the whole page.
Yeah.
So I can't
find it.
It might have been Rabbi Ushpa, maybe I can't remember who said it to us. So or Begafko, and he said like this. He said, in Yiddishkeit, you have the mitzvahs, and then you have all these extra layers of siyogim, and then you have minhagim and everything else. So he said, if chas v'sholom, you're a bit mekel on a minig, but the tate itself and mitzvahs are intact. The peripheral may be a little bit schwach, but if all you have is mitzvahs and you don't have a minhagim, and chas v'sholom, you become a little bit more lenient. Your mamish tapping. Same over here. If the sides always tear a little bit, so it's the margins that talk, but the ikar, the sefer is still intact, and this will be a lesson in life. So now the question is, that's what he used to say. So now the question is over here, if the chsaron is in the margins, is that really a chsaron or not? Teiku. Amar Abzidi, Amar Abchananel, Amar Ab. Now we're going to move to the mitzvah of mezuzah. This is how we go from Torah to mezuzah, and go to film. Then sits it later. Amar Abzidi, Amar Ab, mezuzah, a mezuzah. Shekosva shtayim. If you wrote the mezuzah, 2 words on each line, say that's kosher. Iboyeluhu has an interesting question. What about shtayim v'shalish? What about that you wrote 1 line 2 words, the next line 3 words, and then the next line achas 1 word? Very haphazard. A design. You decide you want to. You see this fancy ksuvas. It's not like a straight thing. You have a little bit here, wider lines here, and goes in here. These fancy designs. What's it in? Like you make it. Shida is like the way you write the shida in the Torah. It's not full lines. It's different. The Meisvei Asa Kashida. If you look on the side of the Gemara, you'll see there's a bunch of diagrams. So these are the different cases in the Gemara. Asa Kashida, you made like a song. We'll see in a minute. Also, if you made a sefer Torah like a song, or Shida Kamoisa, you made a song like a normal sefer Torah, full lines instead of breaking it up. A few words here, a few words there. Psula. You just said that Kolshkein is better to write like a shida, and here it says Mefesh, you write like a shida is possible. It says the Gemara is a chiluk from mezuzah and sefer Torah. Kitanya hi besefer Torah. Where it's meant to be shida, it's shida, and where it's not meant to be shida, you have to populate the full line. Even mezuzah she'asa shtayim v'shalosh v'achi. Look at the top right first picture. You see the top line has 2 words, the next line has 3 words, and the next line has 1 word. Is kshay, that's kosher. That's like a shida. Or bavad, what we don't want you to do is you shouldn't make it kukuva, you should make it like a tent. You look at the next picture, where the first line has 1 word, the next line has 2 words, and the next line has 3 words. We don't want that. Or bavad shleiseni we don't want you to make it like a tail either, where the top line has 3 words, the next line has 2 words, and the next line has only 1 word. Omar Rav Chida says the last line of a mezuzah should be al ha'aretz, just the words al ha'aretz. B'shita achreina, and the last line, just those 2 words. But where do you place those 2 words? Ikadami, some say b'seif shita. Some say you put an end of the line. Look at the next picture. You see they put al ha'aretz at the very end of the line. And ikadami b'tchila shita. Look at the next line. What's machlek? It's very interesting. Now remember, the Eibush is giving you a bracha man yibri yimechem. Kimei hashamayim al ha'aretz. What's this bracha? Kimei hashamayim. So my number b'seif the end of the line. Ki gvoya shamayim al ha'aretz. Just like the shamayim is always above the ground, so too you should live a long life. So therefore, the word al ha'aretz should be under the words kimei hashamayim. There was in the beginning of the line, just like Shemayim are so far away from each other, so too you, that's how it always is, so too you live for a long time. And therefore you make al ha'aretz as far away from Kimei Shemayim as possible. Kimei Shemayim is the end of the line, al ha'aretz is the beginning. That he rolled the mezuzah from echad to shma. Now Rashi says over here, interesting, that the end of the line is echad, and you go to the beginning. You don't have to end the line with echad. You can end the line anywhere you want. So then they ask, why did it say over here from echad? He means from the back to the front. Doesn't necessarily mean that you have to finish the echad. But Rashi clearly says here that at the end of the line, of the top line, should be the word echad. Now, quickly remind you what stumas and psuchas are. Stumas means that you start the next parsha or the next portion in middle of the line. So generally speaking, there's different opinions, but we say there should be a gap of 9 letters. 3 words, you have to have 3 words. We had before the Gemara yesterday, Mishpachei Seichem, Mishpachei Seichem, Mishpachei Seichem. That's how long a line should be. That's the longest words in the Torah. We take the shortest words of the Torah, or 3-letter words, not 2-letter words. 3-letter words, and 3 words is 9 letters. So if you finish in the beginning of the line, and then you have a gap, and then you write in the same line, you write the next parsha. You have a gap of 9 letters. That's called stumis. Or you finish the middle line and you start in the beginning, towards the end of the line. Or if you finish the end of the line, but you start the next line in the middle of the line. Psuchis is you're starting in the beginning of a line. So you finish the line above in the middle, and you start the next one at the beginning of the line. That's called psuchis. So you saw here that he wrote the mezuzah, and the parsha was stumis. Now in the Torah, they're not stumis at all. Interesting. It says here parsha and plural stumas. Taisa says, what kind of parsha says? Only 2 parshas. Stumas stumas. So how can it be both stumas? There's only one part. So he's not bothered with parsha yourself because there are 2 parshas. He's bothered with stumais. So actually, on the side here, he brings his attack another girsa that says stuma, not stumais. No problem. But Taisa didn't have the girsa. He didn't have our new gemaras that have all these different things. So Taisa tries to say because. He doesn't really answer very well because he says that Allah Oretz is the end. He sort of let's say it's the beginning of the line, and you write nothing afterwards. So it's like stumas. Anyway, so use the stumas. Maybe that's a question. You know that the hide on top of an animal, they take that hide off, called the oil, and they split it in the middle. The part above, the part that's sticking out, external, is called klaf. That's the klaf. And then depending of the outside or the inside where the klaf will gvil. The part that's closer to the flesh is called duchsustus. Duch means a place, and sustus means flesh. So it's much better, much finer is the upper layer of the skin than the lower layer of the skin. So a Sefer Torah is written on a klaf or on a gvil. And so he wrote a mezuzah on a duchsustus. So he wrote on the Menachos Daf. He wrote it like a Sefer Torah, a column of a Sefer Torah. That's what he did, which means he made revach mamayla, revach mamati, left a margin above, margin below. Doesn't talk about margin on the sides. But could be because there's nothing else written. Not like a Sefer Torah where you have a bunch of columns. So we need to discuss what should the margin be between one column and the next. Here, because Sachakal is only one column. Maybe Taki, you don't need margins. Maybe you don't need margins because there's nothing next to it that you're worried that's going to touch other letters. There's no issue here. Or maybe you do need margins, but there's no law how much. But Oise Pashi and he made the Pashi psuchas. He made psuchas. Or Mark, I said to him, Rebbe, Matam, why do you make it psuchas? He said, Hoyel the ain't smuchas min ha-Torah. In the Torah, there's stumas. Why do you make psuchas? And why make psuchas? Because they're so far away from each other in the Torah. So therefore, I decided to make it like psuchas, like 2 totally disparate parshas. This is like a new subject. Psuchas is like when there's a new subject. It's like a new subject. Rav Chananel, Amar Rab, the halacha like Shimon Elazar. Sounds like if the halacha of Shimon Elazar and everything that he did, including that he made it psuchas, and you just went ahead and you made Rav Huna made it what? Made it stumas. So he said to him, and everything he said, including psuchas. He said, when we say the halacha of Shimon Elazar is only regarding that you need, the margin above, a margin below, like a Sefer Torah, but not regarding psuchas or stumas. We made a stumas. The kama rebach. So what should the margin be? He said he made a margin above, a margin below. How much? The Sefer used to use like on the laundry. You have a hook to hold your a pin or those things. What's it called again? A peg. They use that to hold the cloth in place. It shouldn't fold and it shouldn't roll. So that whatever the margin you need for that, that's what they used to use. That's it. Okay, we'll stop over here. We'll continue tomorrow, Mr. Shalom.